A very warm welcome to Science and Technology Teaching in the Foundation Phase, LSK3701. I am your lecturer, Mrs. A Carrim. You can contact me on ecarrier1@unisa.ac.za. Okay, so today I want to introduce you to our My UNISA Moodle platform, which is the teaching and learning platform for LSK3701. It is very important for you to continuously check the module site for discussion forums that I add on, as well as announcements. You should constantly check on announcements because most of the time my main communication would be through announcements. There's discussion forums created for general queries, for examination and assignments. It would be best for you to communicate within that specific description so that all students can learn from each other. Remember, no communication from Gmails, which is personal accounts. This is in line with the POPI Act. Remember, this actually protects your own privacy so that no one can get your personal information from us, the University of South Africa. Okay. So I always advise my students to begin with the end in mind. With that being said, each learning unit is thoughtfully processed and planned so that we give you the necessary skills and knowledge that you require to be able to be a successful teacher in the foundation phase for life skills, science and technology. Meaning you need to start from learning unit 1 and work through thoroughly so that you gain the necessary skills and knowledge to be able to teach the subject in the classroom. So remember, it's very important for you to start from the ground to gain the necessary foundation to be able to teach this type of subject. That's what I mean when you end up at the last learning unit. Okay, so I always advise my students to begin with the end in mind. This being said, it's because you basically have to start from learning unit 1. Remember, learning unit 1 gathers all the necessary skills and knowledge that you need to be teaching the subject in the classroom. So as you go through the learning units, you gain the necessary skills. And once you get to learning unit 3 in the science section, you will be more than ready to teach the subject in the classroom. And obviously that's followed by the technology section, which will be learning unit 4 to 6. Okay, so I need to go through the assessments with you. I have many students coming to me in regards of how many assessments does LSK3701 have. This is a year module, so we give you enough time to go through the content before you can actually do the assignments. So assignment 1 is referred to as assessment 1 in your Moodle site, which is your quiz MCQ. So remember, you have to start the quiz online, and you're given the questions, and you have to obviously choose the correct answer and submit once you finish the questions. Assignment 2 will open thereafter. This is your essay type questions, which means you need to have a very good understanding of the content and be able to apply your knowledge in assignment 2. So remember, this is also noted as assessment 2 on your Moodle site, and you will have to submit within the assessment shell that is online. So remember, it must be a PDF document. It must be a single PDF document. We have many students trying to submit more than one page or one document, and then the system ends up accepting the last page submitted, which means if you send a picture, that's what would be submitted as your assignment 2. Also, remember, we have a lot of problems where students submit assignments that are actually of another module. It's very important for you to save your document, as LSK3701 with your student number, assignment 2, so that you don't have this problem where you submit the incorrect assignment. There's nothing I can do as a lecturer. Whatever you submit online will be marked. So in that case, you would get a 0 for submitting an incorrect document, as it is your responsibility as a student to note that you submitted the correct assignment. So all of that two assignments constitute your year mark, which will be 20%, and it is obviously considered as part of your exam admission. So it's compulsory and very important that you submit on time within the due date and time frame that I've allocated under the announcements. I've reminded you on the discussion forums for assignments, as well as on the assessment shell itself. Your online examination, which takes place in September, October time, would count 80% of your mark. Remember, when it comes to the exam, it's very important for you to understand that it's basically application of knowledge. You know, we find many students submitting exams that are obviously using plagiarism, taking directly from the study guide with no understanding, no application. And it really is very sad to see many fail my subject due to this mistake that students are making. So this is just advice that I would like to give you quite early in this year, so that you keep this in mind and go through the content thoroughly and understand this module effectively. Okay, so it's very important for me to go through the application of knowledge for this module. We're currently at the 4th year level. So it's very important to understand that the level of questioning will be quite high at this stage. We are advised to give you more level 5 and 6 questions, which would be 50% of your paper, level 3 and 4, which would only constitute for 40%, and level 1 and 2 for literally only 10%. So it's very important that you be able to not only remember and understand your content, you'll be able to apply, analyze, evaluate, and create content within the science and technology subject area. So this is very important for you to understand while going through the content, that you won't be asked straightforward questions that you can just find in the study guide without no understanding. And, you know, we would know if you have not done any of the activities, just to give your, you know, take your knowledge and be able to apply it in the workplace as well. Okay, so this is basically just to also introduce you to the subject. The purpose of this module is for you to develop an understanding of a few relevant concepts relating to science and technology. Remember, how a teacher is engaged in developing an emergent understanding of the scientific concepts are very important, especially with the young children that you are teaching. So the process skills in which you teach are how children understand science through inquiry and through technology education activities. So just remember, it's very important for you to be able to create these activities and to understand how to take what they already know, and you know, and take that understanding into something more broader in terms of scientific concepts. You will be able to engage foundation phase learners to experiment. Remember, they need to experiment, they need to discover, they need to explore the world that they're living in, using basic scientific processes such as observing, classifying, experimenting, predicting. They need to draw conclusions. This is how they understand the scientific concepts. And they also need to communicate their ideas to others, you know, presenting, whether it be in the form of, you know, making a poster, whatever it may be. This is how they understand and they learn from each other. So furthermore, you will develop self-reflective practices to be able to mediate the science and technology curriculum. Remember, through application and through appropriate teaching strategies and methodologies, you basically can suit any different context that you teach in. Remember, not all schools have the same resources, not all schools have the same equipment or you know, infrastructure that can help you do all of these activities that we advise you on. So you need to take your context, the context of the situation, and obviously work from there. So remember, we expect you to be creative. You know, we understand the situation in terms of technology in different schools, but take your creativity to the next level and, you know, bring science and technology to life for our students. So resources for mediation will be obtained from different sources. Remember, it's important to use the online environment. There's so many things that are continuously updated and printed and adapted to the diverse context that we are teaching in. So I would just like you to, to keep that in mind when you're going through this content of LSK 3701. The study materials that you require to get started with this module is your tutorial letter 101. I know that tutorial 102 has also been uploaded on your study material. It's basically your assignment, which will not necessarily always be added to the site. I've numbered your assignment 2 as 103, and it's going to be uploaded as soon as your assignment 2 opens. LSK3701 study guide is something at your disposal under the official study material. This is your main study material to use for this module. So this module is divided into 2 sections. So remember, you have your science education, which is learning unit 1 to 3. And then you have your technology education, which is learning unit 4 to 6. So we're going to go step by step so that you can follow through and work from the beginning and work your way up to learning unit 6. So the outline of the science section is learning unit 1 is the nature of science and science learning. Learning unit 2 is the components of science learning, and learning unit 3 is planning for science teaching and assessment. So if you can see it basically starts you off to get to the level where you need to be, to be able to actually get to your learning, planning a lesson, and then obviously assessing the student for this subject. Okay, so the outline of this specific presentation is only on learning unit 1, which we will address scientific literacy, the nature of science, learning science through inquiry, scientific concepts, and how concepts actually develop, and then the conceptual change in learning of science, and language and the learning of science. I won't touch on learning unit 2 and 3 because I've decided to do that in a separate video. So let's go to learning unit 1. So the nature of science and science learning. Remember, after you have completed this learning unit, you should be able to analyze problem-based scenarios. Remember, in terms of the environment, in terms of society, you need to get students to start thinking about how can we solve these problems that we have in the environment and society. And you're going to demonstrate the development of scientific literacy. And be able to get students to communicate their ideas and opinions about the nature of science and scientific literacy by means of appropriate academic and professional discourse, and then obviously identify and interpret scientific concepts in science investigation. So, when you're doing an investigation, you must be able to get students to identify the scientific concepts that, that you're trying to teach them. And cite appropriate examples. It's always important to bring in examples when you're teaching. That's how students, note what the science concept is actually about. Some of them have their own examples, and sometimes through examples, they just have a better understanding of the scientific concepts. And then obviously students need to identify, interpret, and analyze a lot of things in relation to science. And we as teachers also need to identify, interpret, and analyze the thinking of children, and the way they process information in relation to science is quite different to how we wish they would. We need to start from the grassroots and get them to the level that we need them to be on. Okay, so let's understand scientific literacy. So now we need to think about it. What is the natural science learning area curriculum of South Africa aimed at? Remember, it's aimed at promoting learners' scientific literacy. And then you need to understand what are the 4 interrelated features that are referred to by scientific literacy. And that would be, your scientific knowledge and the use of knowledge to identify questions, to acquire new knowledge, to explain the scientific phenomena, and actually draw evidence-based conclusions about science-related issues. And then you need to understand, the characteristic features of science as a form of human knowledge and inquiry. And then also the awareness of how science and technology shape people's, their material, the intellectual and cultural environments that they find themselves in, and their willingness to actually engage in science-related issues. with the ideas of science as a constructive and concerned and reflective citizen of, of our country. So we also need to then reflect on what does scientific literacy influence? So this is something that you need to think about, and you need to understand that it influences people's decisions about personal and societal problems. If you look at examples in terms of how does things affect you on a personal level and as a society at large. Now you need to also think about which three components are distinguished to promote the aim of scientific literacy. So remember, the scientific knowledge of concepts, the scientific process skills, and the scientific attitudes. You need to think of all of this when planning a lesson. So why is this aim? Why do you think this aim is broken down into these components? You need to think about this. If you try to teach everything at once, students won't get to understand, very easily. So you need to break it into components that are achievable, So you plan in a way that you achieve this and then you go on to the next level. So they need to be broken down into components. Okay, so let's understand the nature of science. So there are two views that people hold about the nature of science. Remember, there's a more traditional view, held by teachers, that science is a subject and it has rules, it has laws, it has theories that need to be learned. But the more modern view is that science is the study of a natural phenomena, as well as, you're trying to understand the world and the way people think, the way they act. And so how should you view science? This is a question that you need to ask yourself. How should you view science? If you view science as a way of doing rather than an object to study, then you will be motivated to teach science as a form of inquiry and not just as a subject that involves study of facts. Especially with young learners, if you just throw a lot of facts in, without making it alive for them, making them understand, they won't actually take on the concept very clearly. It will be boring, and it will not interest them at all. So you need to make the subject actually fun for young learners. So how do learners become scientifically literate? You need to think of this, in terms of developing an understanding of the nature of science and becoming scientifically literate. You need to allow learners the freedom to inquire. Learners through inquiry can understand so much more than just throwing facts, like I said earlier. How can you use teaching approaches to develop the scientific literacy of children who are curious about the world? So remember, when you allow learners to ask questions, and you don't make them afraid of science, you basically integrate an approach known as STEAM. I'm sure most of you find this as a new a new approach, but it basically stands for science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. So how do you incorporate the STEAM approach to teach science in an integrated way? It's basically a means of indigenous knowledge, where you take all of these teaching approaches and you combine it with play, so this is basically the focus is mainly on teaching science through inquiry. So it gives you a good way to make it interesting and get the students involved in the subject. What is the nature of the practice of science? Remember, scientific knowledge is tentative, so it means it's subject to change. If you look at the world and in terms of how they can observe the natural world, all of this is subject to change in terms of creativity, invention, how, socially, culturally. You need to think of all of this as well. And there's obviously a distinction between observation and inferences, where you need to think of the relationship between scientific theories and laws. So you need to combine everything at once. And what are the other ways? I think what integration promotes the development of scientific literacy? Remember, in terms of explicit reflective instruction about nature of science and scientific literacy in science topics, those basically promote the development of scientific literacy. So when thinking of the nature of science, you need to think of all of these things, that make the subject interesting for our learners. Let's look at learning science through inquiry. Like we said, this is what we need to get students to inquire about the subject, to inquire about certain scientific concepts, and not just be presented with facts that they need to accept without, understanding it. So do you think science can be memorized? You need to firstly think about that. Do you think it can be memorized? Too many teachers approach science as it is a body of knowledge, that anyone can simply memorize. However, there is a wealth of scientific knowledge, and more is being generated every moment, and we don't know which facts will be the most important in learners' lives. Certain things that you learn in school, it's not necessarily something that you may deem important in life, but all of this tend to give them the knowledge that they need to, to live in a world like ours. So what makes the exploration of science enjoyable and supports the lifelong learning of science? You need to think of this as well. What would make it enjoyable? Think of your classroom. Some of you already have experience, through your pracs. What do we know? How can we get learners to solve problems and enjoy things like this? Where everyone will have everyday problems in their lives, and to be able to give them that thinking and reasoning skills, with open mindedness, it makes exploration of science enjoyable, and it actually supports this lifelong learning that we talk about. So what does the inquiry-based approach develop? So remember, at the end of the day, it develops scientific thinking. Sorry about that. I think it went, but okay. Okay, so it basically develops scientific thinking. So science through inquiry, it serves 5 functions. I think in the study guide, it notes 4, but you can add, with what we've been explaining, you can add another function as well. So think about it. It promotes the development of scientific concepts. It promotes understanding of how we know science. It develops an understanding of the nature of science, and also develops the skills of independent inquiry about the natural world. You get many students who start asking questions, especially after a lesson, and that's when they actually go broader into the topic and have a better understanding of the scientific concept. What do you understand by inquiry as a teaching approach? Remember, it's opposite to approaches like transmission approach, which just exposes information to students, with no real interaction. It's constructivist in nature, which means that learning is a result of ongoing changes in our mental framework. And they attempt to make meaning through their experiences. Obviously, in the classroom, if you take your science lesson outside, it will be much more interesting for the students. And it encourages active learning in children and develops an attitude of curiosity. And curiosity is to look at something from a new perspective, and to question what is being observed. I love how our young learners are very inquisitive about the environment, asking questions, whether it's to their parents or to the teacher. You must always, encourage them to ask more questions. This is how they learn and gather more information. Okay, so why is it important to encourage learners to question? Remember, they're wondering. So by them asking why, and they actually turning to you as a teacher to give them that basis on, to get to that level where they understand the science concept. So to be cautious about accepting things at face value, you need to get students to inquire, ask questions, observe, and learners should also allow them to bring in their own explanations. You'll actually enjoy that, where you can actually correct them where they're wrong, or, work on another activity to correct them so that they're learning at all times. So encourage learners to explore new situations in an objective and open-minded way. So it's very important to understand that this inquiry as a teaching approach is very important for students at this level. Okay, so let's look at scientific concepts. What are concepts? This is something that you need to understand, because before we can discuss how scientific concepts develop in the foundation phase learners, we should know what a concept is. So concepts are basically representations in the brain. To be precise, a concept is something that is constructed in our brain. So if we look at it from a student's perspective, the idea of how activity in the brain can lead to learning is complex and confusing, especially with young learners that we have in our classrooms. For now, it is important that you know that connections that are made in the brain lead to learning, which is what we want to do in the classroom to create a learning atmosphere for science and technology. So concepts are the basic units of knowledge. So it allows people to organize and categorize information. So this is how our learners in our classroom, they start gaining the ability to organize and categorize information. And it plays an important role in the process by which scientific concepts can be developed in the brain. So remember, there are different types of concepts that build different bodies of knowledge, and they can contain different kinds of representations of information and different connections that students can, refer to. So why do you think it's important to develop scientific concepts in the foundation phase? Remember, learning takes place when children build up a representation, connections in their brain based on examples of a concept. They basically think, they reason, they use examples to develop a theory about the concept. And when children learn, they basically trying to understand how is this? How do we get to this type of understanding? So let's look at an example that was given in your study guide, in terms of components of the concept of birds. If the concept is birds, then the prototype of a bird could be, for instance, chicken. And examples would be pigeons, doves, and hawks. And obviously, then they develop a theory in terms of a theory of birds. They have 2 legs, they have 2 wings, they have feathers, they can fly. So remember, these connections are not made if learners are taught to memorize facts. Facts are only remembered for a period of time, but they cannot be used to actually solve problems. So one example of problem solving with respect to the topic of birds that we're speaking about now is when children are given, for instance, a worksheet, and they're asked to name the animals on the worksheet. So they decide whether, the animal is a bird or not. So children will use the concept of bird that you've taught them in the classroom to solve the problem. They rely on the knowledge of examples that you've given in the classroom, and then they sort of organize the animals into groups according to the theory of birds. And this is when you should ask questions like, is it an animal that has 2 legs? Is it an animal that has 2 wings? In terms of feathers, claws, a beak, can it fly? So you're basically giving them, well-formulated understanding of that specific concept of birds. So you need to reflect on these 3 components. Even in an exam or in an assignment, you can be asked to actually, take this concept described by Lito and actually reflect on the 3 components and show how you would get your student to understand a theory of whatever concept you are teaching. So what must teachers do to develop scientific concepts? They need to know how children understand the concepts that are taught. You sort of know what children, the misconceptions they have. Teachers need to ask questions that allow children to explain their understanding. We can't just snub them off and say, no, that's not right. Let them speak their minds. At the beginning, obviously, this often is described as pre-knowledge, but later on you will learn that it is better to call children's understanding. We can call it rather a naive theory or a preconception. And then you ask good questions that lead to observation, you know, where they start observing, they start comparing, they start classifying and making predictions that allow them to understand the concept. We allow children to obviously communicate their understanding, you know, through poetry, through art, through role play. All of that is important in the teaching of science. Okay, so now we need to go on to how concepts develop. So from when do children actually develop their own understanding of the world? You need to understand from birth, we actually develop a certain understanding of the world around us. So these are all, you know, psychologists would describe it as how development happens in stages, you know, in terms of sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and so forth. So why is young learners' ideas of the world described as naive? So remember, young learners have ideas about how the world works, you know, from seeing what happens when they interact with the world and from people in terms of cultural knowledge. Remember, all of that plays a big part before they come to school, basically. So young learners have ideas and their understanding is called naive because it is not always scientific. It's not always true, you know, it's what they observe and what they understand. And they're quite young, so we need to obviously improve on that. So why is it important for teachers to consider learners' understanding, you know, of the world and the scientific concepts before they teach? Remember, basically, learners bring this understanding of their world into your classroom. So teachers will want to develop a more scientific understanding of the concept. It's actually a good challenge for you as a teacher, especially as a science and technology teacher. You know, you feel proud of yourself when you get them to actually understand certain scientific concepts. It is important that teachers know what learners' understanding is of scientific concepts before they actually teach them. You know, this is how you can, you know, go back to what they think and tell them, you know, basically why it is this way through examples. So what example can you describe of how children have a naive concept about a scientific phenomena? You must think about this, you know, when you're using the discussion forum and e-tutor sites, think about all of these things, you know. If you look at water cycle, you know, what do students think about using clouds? For example, young learners may think that clouds are like cotton wool. You know, we all can relate to that when we were younger. It looks so like, you know, fluffy. And so it is difficult for young learners to understand that clouds are actually made up of tiny water droplets. So it is our duty as teachers to actually give them the scientific understanding of things that they have encountered in the young age. So considering the example, you know, above, or obviously in the study guide, how will you plan and present an inquiry-based learning activity to develop their understanding? You know, in terms of worksheets, in terms of experiments, whatever it is that can actually allow them to inquire and understand this conceptual change that they're going through. So how does that scientific development occur? Remember, it occurs through changing learners' naive understanding to a more scientific understanding. So this is the diagram that you just need to keep in mind. Naive understanding plus scientific understanding equals to your conceptual change. So let's look at conceptual change in the learning of science. So remember, there's a lot of content that you need to read through. You know, there are several ideas about how conceptual change happens in the brain. The time does not actually allow us to discuss all the views about conceptual change. So we'll mostly refer to Carey's 2009 description, where she says basically conceptual change happens to many bootstrapping activities. To understand, I'm sure that for some of you, bootstrapping may be a new concept. So remember, you should have an understanding of the world. This is the word booting means, you know, it's used some years back to refer to the process of starting a computer. I think you can relate to that. In computer talk, a bootstrap is a program that allows sequence of programs to be loaded, you know, in order to initiate the operating system of a computer. So in other words, we can look at it as a way to, you know, to that learning takes place, you know, the way that we start from the beginning with all information that is being received. So they cannot learn all facts at once. They need to start with small amounts of information that get linked together into this broad scientific concept that we're thinking of. So I would like you all to think of an example, of conceptual change. How would you change a naive understanding of a scientific concept to a scientific understanding of that specific scientific concept? It's something you need to think of examples. Look at your CAPS document and look at topics that, how would you teach this, and this is how you would understand and be able to apply this conceptual change theory. So what are the characteristics of bootstrapping as a model of conceptual change? It's very important for you to understand this, in terms of you need to relate the components of concepts that are learned directly in terms of, for example, if we look at to understand the scientific meaning of the concept cloud again, you must understand water, you must understand water vapor, water liquid, temperature, pressure. So you need to bring in all these components that can help them have a better understanding. So the components are obviously not first understood scientifically, but it is not possible for young learners to understand liquid vapor can evaporate. All of this needs to be introduced to learners as words. And these words are actually are not obviously scientifically understood in the starting, but these words are known as placeholders because they basically hold the place of the development of scientific understanding of the concept. So remember, you need to think of all of this while teaching science. And then also you get the modeling processes. These are used to form the foundation of developing a clearer scientific understanding of these placeholder words. So even these placeholder words, they're not quite simple for our students. We need to, to basically separate the components of a concept and, so that they can actually use activities that allow them to inquire based learning approaches and use examples that, that they can basically understand the concept of a cloud, if we're looking at that example. So you need to also understand the modeling processes with reference to analogy and inductive inference. That would be on page 12 in your study guide. Remember, analogy is a comparison between one thing and another. And inductive inferences are made when a person goes beyond the available evidence to form a conclusion, like a hypothesis. You need to read more on that as well. So all of this, if you look at the diagrammatic explanation of bootstrapping, it shows how this naive understanding, basically turns into scientific understanding at a later stage. So what do you need to know as a foundation phase teacher in order to develop activities that will effectively start the long and slow process of a conceptual change? This is actually very important for you guys as teachers. You already refer yourself as teachers because you are practicing the knowledge that you are taking from this course. Remember, understand what is a learner's understanding of the scientific idea, basically, and then go to what scientific concept do you want to achieve? What new scientific knowledge do you want to lay off to the students? And this is how you can, you can decide how you're going to develop the new scientific understanding. How are you going to use the bootstrapping, and how are you going to plan the science activities, and what modeling activities and analogies and examples you will use in your inquiry-based lesson. These are all important things to think about when confronting this type of lessons. Okay, so let's look at language and the learning of science. Like most people know in schools, English is something that's spread throughout all the other subjects. If the student is good in English and good at presenting and communicating themselves, they somehow find the rest of the subjects quite easy. But this is not always the case, obviously, but we need to also develop the language in our own subject. It's not only the English teacher's responsibility, we can also obviously benefit from their language skills. So why does language play an important role in the learning of scientific concepts? Remember, hands-on science activities, they aid in the development of language and reading. So reading is developed actually because a learner who can discriminate or see differences between objects will be better able to discriminate or, or read words or communicate, the difference they're seeing if we give them those opportunities. And also reading about the world when one doesn't have experience of the world is basically allowing them to, to inquire about certain things. So sometimes you can use a comprehension that makes them actually envision what is being said to them. So you need to suggest types of language activities that can be incorporated into your teaching of science, in terms of reading a story, whatever it is. These activities actually allow them to, to communicate and to improve their comprehension, improve their ability to question, to make predictions. They start getting confident in those ways. So if you look at it, we all come down to, from the beginning, we talked about good questioning techniques. Remember, teacher questioning is very important because learners who are taught by teachers who use good questioning, they become curious, about the world. They continue to ask questions. They don't feel that they're not allowed to ask a question. They probe, they interrogate information, and this all makes them understand the concept better. So I would advise you as teachers to please allow your young learners to question and actually encourage such things. Now we look at what 3 language scenarios are faced in South African foundation-based classrooms. Remember, the first scenario is where learners are taught in their home language, which is English. And the second scenario is where learners are taught in scientific words in English, but English is not their first language. So there's a lot of scenarios in different schools. Some of you might find yourself teaching in an English medium school and others in an Afrikaans medium or whatever other language that we have in our country. So the third scenario is where learners are taught science in their home language, which is not English, in the foundation phase, and then taught science in English from the intermediate phase. This actually is scenarios that create a lot of problems in the classroom, especially if students and, because there's a lot of implications of the language and in terms of teaching science and taught in a multilingual society. So these are all things that you need to consider. Remember, I said it's very important to consider the different contexts that you're teaching in. Not everyone will teach in the same school with the same resources, with the same infrastructure. And so it does affect many people. Okay, so let's look at the next slide, which is the role of working memory. Okay. So it's a role of working memory in the learning of language of science. So remember, thinking and reasoning is controlled in the brain by the area, that is an executive function. The EF, this area of the brain controls 3 main aspects, like you can see on the table: recall of information, inhibition of ideas, and shifting between ideas. So remember, what is your understanding of this? You need to understand. Remember, if naive ideas are stopped to relevant knowledge, and naive knowledge is what children actually hold. And like I said, inquiry-based learning gives evidence of scientific ideas and understanding. And then students start shifting between ideas to reasoning, and then we develop this new scientific understanding. And this is when conceptual change actually happens. When learners reason, they explain their thinking using their ideas and their working memory. So it's very important to understand that the evidence links in basically the performance in the working memory in terms of vocabulary acquisition, early academic success in reading, mathematics, comprehension. All of this, affect the process of this executive function in the science learning component. Okay, so now we need to look at why does the nature of science require learners to start scientific inquiry from an understanding of concepts. Remember, young learners already have an understanding of the concepts like we've discussed previously based on their interaction with the world and the people around them, which is stored in their long-term memory. And their understanding is based on the way in which concepts are connected in the brain. And all of this is very important for you to understand, especially because you're working with young learners. So to try to answer the question, a learner will start the theory of the concept, in his brain. And this is, the learner uses this theory to, to explain an answer and to find an understanding. And obviously the learner must change or update his theory about the concept as you are teaching all of this. So it's very important that you understand understand how this all kind of connects to each other. And while working through this section, I would advise you to go through these questions and, answer these questions as you go through the content so that you form a good understanding of how children recall from their long-term memory into their working memory. And after an activity, how children actually explain certain things. And, it's just something that you need to consider when doing these lessons, and how language plays an important role in learning in the foundation phase. How is your thinking about teaching science changed? Have you made any connection, made any connection in terms of between teaching language and teaching science? Can you see how they connected? How would you describe that connection? Can you describe the connection between learning science and learning scientific words? So there are a lot of online videos that you can actually start watching just to see how a science lesson is conducted, in terms of investigations, experiments. I would advise you all to, really get into the content and really understand how to bring the science teaching to life. So this chapter is actually quite interesting in terms of how students move from a naive understanding to a conceptual understanding of scientific concepts. And I think you really enjoy this this learning unit if you really put your mind into it and work through it thoroughly, doing your activities and watching videos that can help your understanding. Yes, so that's all from me today. Thank you so much for watching this this presentation. I know that it will get you started and motivated. This module is really lovely, and it's something that you can actually, push you into that science and teaching and technology mode. And I see you doing great things in the classroom, and I can't wait to interact with you further.